We don't like it to be big. We don't like to be a machinery. We don't want to mass produce, etc. So we want that vibe. And we believe that a lot of makers want that vibe also. But if together, somehow we can make that smallness have an impact. Diba? So when we saw the space, it was too big for us. That's the only time we decided maybe we can give that bigger dream a shot. We had a small home-based business called Popjunklove. So Popjunklove specializes in upcycled trinkets and handmade plushies. So that's um, actually how we started. That's in 2007. And we've been doing it for a lot of years, trying to save up. We actually just had 5,000 pesos in the start. So talagang the dream of having our own store, which is Common Room now, is uh, parang shot in the ano na talaga. Parang it's something that we never even dreamed for ourselves when we were starting out. So that's in 2007. And then fast forward to 2015, we finally had enough saved to put up our own brick and mortar space. Hindi ba? Medyo matagal na pag-iipon and hustling sa mga bazaars. And that's when we saw a space and the opportunity to put up a store there. And it was too big for our small brand. It's just a home-based business. And we were just creating dolls and small trinkets. We thought it was too big for our small brand. And that's when we decided, why not open the store or share the space with other makers? Again, we've been doing bazaars for a lot of years already, more than a decade before we were able to put up Common Room. And we met a lot of makers and artists along the way that who, like us, don't have their own permanent spaces. You only see them in pop-ups. You only see them in art fairs, etc. So that's when we opened up the idea to them that maybe we could share this space together. So we started with 33 makers in Katipunan. Now we have 4 branches in UPTC, Power Plant Mall, Alabang Town Center, and Ayala Malls, Manila Bay. And from 33 makers, we now have more than 200 local makers and artists under Common Room. Our dream at the start was really a simple dream, just to have a home for our own business. Parang nakakapagod kasi to, join bazaars all the time. And there will come a point where you will dream of having your own space and store for your own brand. And then we were fortunate enough also to somehow been able to travel because of the business. And from there, in other countries, you see a thriving creative industry also. And you see them gathering together in one space. So somehow that idea is, somehow planting bigger dreams for us. But we never really thought it's something that we will do. It's not something that we thought will be our advocacy or mission. But when we saw the space and it was too big, and we don't feel like Popjunklove is a small business and we prefer that for the business. We don't like it to be big. We don't like to be a machinery. We don't want to mass produce, etc. So we want that vibe. And we believe that a lot of makers want that vibe also. But if together, somehow we can make that smallness have an impact. Diba? So when we saw the space, it was too big for us. That's the only time we decided maybe we can give that bigger dream a shot. That's when we invited the 33 makers who we met along the way to join us for that first ever store. Actually, we don't reach out anymore because once they're in Common Room, they rarely pull out, and we don't really expand very aggressively. So there's almost always a full lineup or roster of artists in space, and there's not enough space for makers. So that's always our ongoing challenge in Common Room, how to make space for more amazing Filipino artists. So now what we do is, recently this year, we actually create a pop-up space in all stores so that we can, bring in always revolving new makers and artists who've always wanted to join the community and the stores. Honestly, Miggy, our lineup of applicants is more than 1,000, 2,000 already, spanning several years. And honestly, hindi namin maipasok lahat for the reason na hindi naman lumalaki yung space per store, di ba? Unless we aggressively expand and build more stores, which is not really our vision for the business. So, what we do during the pandemic is we actually open the YouTube channel because of the community. Somehow, for us, it's an incubation space. So if you're in Common Room, you don't only get a chance to showcase your products to the market or make your products more accessible to the market. It's somehow also an incubation space and, a place where artists gather and learn from each other. So that's what we're trying to do with the pop-up space. And then with the YouTube channel, we're trying to replicate that feeling of sharing those learnings, even if you're not in the space yet. So that's how we're communicating with our makers and potential makers who can be, part of the community in the future. So how did we start? Some craft tutorials, business tutorials. So those are the things that we put out on our YouTube channel. And also you will see that also regularly on our social media platforms. The pandemic was really hard on Common Room PH. Again, we were a small business. We didn't have, a big bank that could, sustain us even if sales are not coming in. So that's why we actually closed a store. Our first store in Katipunan, we had to close it down because we will not be able to sustain it and not sacrifice the other branches. When we closed Katipunan, the idea was we transfer to a studio space. So the pandemic somehow highlighted that the business model is so focused on physical spaces that we don't own. So when all the malls closed down and there were lockdowns, we didn't have access to our own inventory. So even if the businesses were already shifting to e-commerce, etc., we didn't have our inventory with us. So that's when we decided, let's close one store, let's open a studio space to house our inventory and put up our e-commerce. We actually almost closed down. Not just Katipunan, but the entire Common Room business, we almost closed down because even if the stores were closed, we had to support, our staff, etc. And again, our savings were not that big because again, we were a small business and 2 years of the pandemic was too much, right? So we almost closed down, but thankfully, because we had a very solid community of makers and also a very solid following of shoppers, etc., who really understand the story of the business. When we held a fundraising campaign that during the pandemic, it actually was a success and it was able to, help us weather through a few more months of the pandemic. And then stores started opening again, the market started opening again. On the question of what's happening now, post-pandemic, now that we're coming back to the pre-pandemic movement, actually, we're really focusing on the stores. As I mentioned earlier, we're trying to improve the spaces and looking at the weaknesses of our business model. And that is, for example, we can't make space for new makers. So we made a pop-up space, so that we can always welcome new ones. So they are temporary, but still longer than a pop-up, which is usually just 3 days, right? But our pop-up spaces in stores is 3 months, and then they get a chance to come back during the holidays for the top brands that we were able to, welcome for the year. So that's some of the improvements that we are doing. And alongside that, we are not, we are continuing our efforts to strengthen our presence online so that it doesn't happen again. Like if physical stores close down, the online stream of income is still open. So that's why our YouTube channel is still very active. We're still continuing uploading on our e-commerce, etc. So those are the things that we are doing now, following our lessons from the pandemic years. Basically, the creative industry is thriving in the Philippines, and that's good. Our shoppers are very mindful now. While there are still shoppers who, prefer cheap ones, because that we need it. We need those options also. But we also see a rise in shoppers who would really, save up for things that they believe means more than just buying something. So they are more mindful consumers. Marami na tayong ganon. Like, they buy for your advocacy, not just because I buy it because I need it. Meron ding buy because I want it, then knowing that I'm supporting an artist. So may mga ganon. So it's really thriving. There's appreciation, there's support for the creative industry and our local creatives and makers and small businesses. So that's very positive. So for our business, our plans is really to, focus on our weakness, which is making space for more amazing Filipino makers and artists. So we see right now this year, there's so many cons, there's so many fairs, art fairs, bazaars popping up, and people are really going to these experiences. So somehow in 2024, it's something that we see Common Room doing a lot of also, so that it's our opportunity to, welcome other makers through these temporary activations also. And also, it's a different experience kasi if it's Common Room, it's not just a pop-up. It's most likely something that involves, workshops, talks with other makers. So it's not just a buying event, but a gathering and experiential. And that's what we're seeing more of in 2024. So focusing on that, making space for more Filipino makers and artists. I think there's progress in that front, There are more artists who are aware of their value and their worth. Pero hindi pa rin mawawala yung artists na, just starting out and do not know how to charge and would do work for X deals, would do work for products, etc. So hindi pa rin mawawala siya. And I don't think that we can take it against them. It's maybe their way of exposing themselves to brand deals and building up their portfolio. For me, it's really a process. It's an artist's journey of discovering their value and eventually realizing, I won't take this anymore. And what's good is that there are brands, when you do hit that stage, when you say, I know my value, I know my worth, there are brands and there are businesses and there are even government projects, who would agree, right? Unlike before, diba? Na sino ka ba? Ganyan. But now, I'm saying that there's progress in this front because there are businesses who would say, yes, you do deserve that payment for the work that you will put out for our businesses and for my brands. There's still a lot of work to do in this front, in other countries. They can build creative hubs. They can create a building full of small businesses of artists, etc. for free because it's funded by a government, It's something that we still don't see here in the Philippines. But I guess the silver lining here is that here in the Philippines, creatives and artists learn to, find ways to be sustainable in their own right. Because government funding is not sustainable, right? You have to always justify why you need funding. Here in the Philippines, artists are learning that the hard way because they really don't have funding to begin with. right? Some do get funding, but for the most part, kulang pa on that front. But I'm not saying wala pa. There's progress also on this front also.